So, wherever you're listening, however you're listening, welcome to TAP, also known as the Alphabet Podcast. I've got a very special edition today on the podcast. Today, we're covering B, which is boundaries. And I couldn't think of anything better to include two of my oldest friends. So, I hope you guys will give them a warm welcome. So, should we do it alphabetically? So, am I good with the alphabet E? So, Marissa, welcome to the podcast. Tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Liana. Happy to be here. I've known Liana for 30 odd years now, which is a very long time. It's been a solid friendship. One of the youngest of 4 siblings. I work in the financial sector. Yeah, that's about it, basically. This is me.
Yeah. Welcome to the podcast. Tell the
Yes, hello,
listeners
thanks for having me.
a little bit about yourself.
Me and Liana met, how long ago now? 25 years ago. On the shop floor in Sainsbury's. I'm a mum of 4, grandmother of 3, and I work within the education sector and have done for 20 years.
Wow. You know, black don't crack. So we got 30 years friendship here, 20 plus years here. Like you
Yeah.
just said, grandmother, can you believe that? Okay.
Yeah, I know.
Wow.
Never.
So-
Amazing.
So guys, it's so nice having you on. I'm usually just here having to bounce off me and my mic. So it's nice to have some company on this podcast. So today, guys, we're going to be talking about boundaries. Now, boundaries are something that we have everywhere in society. You know, we have the law, we have codes of conduct at work, but for the interest of clarity, the boundaries that we're talking about today are personal boundaries. Okay, so even before I get into what personal boundaries are, I'd like to just open up this podcast straight away and just ask you guys, feel free to jump in wherever. What are boundaries and why do you think they're important?
I remember when you first said to me you wanted me to do this episode with you. And I just said, I don't think I can really talk about boundaries. I don't think I really have any. And then we started talking about what boundaries actually were. And I realized I had loads of boundaries that I just didn't actually realize that's what they were. But I think for me, it made me realize talking to you as well that I have boundaries with people that they don't even know I've got. So as soon as they do something like that, as soon as they start with me, they get lost because you already do something, I'm leaving. You just don't know what it is. And it actually made me think, well, how's that ever going to work? Maybe I need to change it up a little bit. But I do keep a tally in my head that, okay, this is where I'm at. This is where I'm at. If they do this, then it's a bye for me. But yeah, I didn't realize that they were actually boundaries. I just thought this is my life and this is how I live it.
So that's very interesting. So you say you have these boundaries, but you don't actually tell anybody what these boundaries are. You just keep scoring your head.
But there's usually that, initial conversation of, if you cheat, I'm going to leave, or if you do this and that. But there's other things that, there's probably little things that I think about in terms of like how they treat their family, how they are around other people, and me just knowing, okay, this is how my boundaries are with this person because I know what kind of person they are. So when we get to that stage and I decide, okay, I can't be around this person, because I feel like if you have too many boundaries as well around someone, that's really toxic.
Yeah.
Why do you have to, it's like you have to be a different person around them because you have to keep so many things away from them.
That's interesting. Very interesting way of putting it. So you got on to the fact that you do have boundaries, even though at first it was hard to identify. But why do you think they're important?
There has to be a line. There has to be a line because otherwise you will just get taken for an idiot. Like you really will. If if anybody can do anything to you, then, where is there ever a stop? There's not one then if you don't have any sort of boundaries. So they're definitely important. And yeah, probably have to be a bit more verbal with them in the future. But yeah, I've always had them. And even as a child, when I think back now to the things that I put up with and things I didn't, and yeah, that was it for me. And then I'd be circles or friendship groups, whatever it was. So yeah, it's always been something that I just didn't identify it as actually that is a boundary.
And I think that's the same for a lot of people. So Marissa, I'm going to ask you the same question. What do you think boundaries are and why do you think they're important?
I think, like Michelle, when you initially said we're going to do boundaries, I found it hard to quantify. I still find it hard to quantify and articulate what a boundary is. I know for myself, I think I wouldn't like to say I'm closed off or I'm standoffish, But in certain environments around different people, I've noticed between myself and like one of my other good friends that I wouldn't be the first person to, like, in an office environment, I'm not the first person to go up and talk to somebody and engage with somebody. You know, I'm very much, I would sit back and I would observe and I would see the situation and I want to know if I want to go in or not. And if I do go in, I think for me, I'm very, I'm really thinking very close my information,
Hmm.
right? How I talk about myself, what I say about myself, who I choose to tell what to, and without consciously realizing it, for me, that's a boundary. I don't tend to tell people too much about myself on a personal level,
Hmm.
only surface stuff, really, I would say more than anything else, until I get to know an individual or a group of people better and that I know that I can trust them. And then as, relationships form, I can, you either tend to get deeper in the, relationship, whatever it is, whether it be, work, friend, partner, whatever that might be, or you keep it completely, for me anyway, at least I tend to keep it completely surface. It's just your general chit chat and stuff like that. And whether that's me just protecting myself unconsciously, not knowing that that's how I go about connecting with people. Um, I don't know, but I think it's important, again, like you and Michelle said, um, because you do need to draw the line somewhere.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of times with boundaries, I think maybe boundaries and trust go hand in hand. And, when one's broken,
She's a
a
really
line is
therapist.
You love and hate, right?
it's they go hand in hand. So I think you tend to just either keep it close, either you're loose with it or you're close with it. I don't know, but
Good
yes, I
explanation.
think they
Because
go hand in hand.
boundaries are very closely linked to trust. For those of you that are at Marissa's level of therapist, boundaries are closely linked to trust. But I think if I was to define boundaries, it is where one person ends and another person begins. It's like what you're comfortable with, your deal breakers, how you would like to be treated. Because you hear the saying, like, people can only treat you how you allow. And that is very true. But from a mental health perspective, boundaries in the first instance are very important for self care.
Yeah.
And self care is just all about what you do to make sure that you're well enough and healthy enough to fulfill your daily tasks. So, if you don't have boundaries, it's quite possible that you'd be putting loads and loads of things in your stress container. So, guys, if you're wondering what I'm talking about by stress container, you need to go back to COVID. You may be saying yes to things that you should be saying no to, and literally not having a line where you can stop. So that could be work, friendships, because Marissa, you highlighted that there's boundaries in different relationships. So you have friendships, relationships, and people often forget about family. So we'll get into that bit a bit later, but I just want to keep the questions coming because while I've got you guys on here, it's very interesting to hear your insight. So, guys, do you think all boundaries are good?
They've all served their purpose. Like Marissa said, I'm just how she is. Remember, that's how you and I met in the workplace. I used to sit there and not speak to anybody. And you know how Leanna is, Miss Chatterbox, she always wants someone to talk to. So she was the first one that came. I think I've been there probably about 2-3 months, and she came up to me one Saturday afternoon and we got talking and we've been friends ever since. And that's how I always am in workplaces. I keep to myself. And if someone starts a conversation, then you try and get to know them and think, okay, what kind of person is this? And I think with work relationships as well, though, a lot of the time they are very surface.
Yeah.
Don't ever get personal with it. I think there's, in all the years that I've worked in different organizations and met all these hundreds of people, I've probably got 5 close friends that I met in work, and they've all been friends for like 10 plus years. So there's only, you find those rare ones in workplaces, but a lot of the time, you do have your boundaries there. You don't tell them anything that you really do.
And that's the first boundary we have, which is
Yeah.
the sharing of information.
Yeah.
So, but when you think about boundaries, do you think all boundaries are good, or do you think that there's ways that boundaries can be used to be harmful?
I guess it depends if you're at the receiving end when you say harmful, because is it harmful because of how you're feeling because there's this boundary there? Or is it, again, like you said, that person's trying to practice that self-love where they say, no, this is where my line is, and it might hurt you, but I can only give you so much. So yeah, I guess it depends in what sense. How could it be harmful?
Okay, because I think it's important to have boundaries, but when you're laying a boundary, it's important that you're thinking the reason behind it. So, you know, whereas a boundary that helps me to have my own space might be a good boundary, a boundary where somebody asserts control over you would be a bad boundary. Like the difference between possibly, maybe partner that you live with, you say to them, if you're going to be home late, could you send me a message so I know that you're okay? That would be quite a healthy boundary. Whereas,
Yeah.
that same partner saying to their partner, you need to send me a message to let me know who you're with because I'm jealous. That is a very harmful boundary. A harmful boundary. So, Marissa, can you kind of see where boundaries can sometimes be a bit problematic, possibly?
Yeah. I think though, it goes to how they're implemented as well. Like you said, it's having that level of control, but also again, it's having that level of respect, right? I don't think um I think a lot of the times when boundaries are put in place, I think they're very unconscious.
Mhm.
Right. I think we go about our daily lives and we're not ticking off this is a boundary, that's a boundary, da, da, da. I think they're very natural. I think um, you know, they're very unconscious, but they are there.
Mhm.
Um when it comes to somebody manipulating a situation, overstepping that line because they want to assert control in a situation. And that doesn't just have to be between partners, that could be between family or that could be between friends. I know I've experienced that with friends, some friends as well. You know, it's wanting to own that space and only, they can own it. Um,
And owning you in
it
the process, I guess.
Right. Yeah, there you go. And it is sad. It's not nice to be on the receiving end because again, I think a lot of the times, especially in friendships, you think you're on a level playing field. You think you're on equal ground, right? Because you're friends,
Mhm.
right? So naturally you come into a situation and you like each other and you get to know each other and you do things and you spend time or whatever. And all the while you go along and you think that that's an equal thing. It's
Yeah.
50-50 thing. And you don't realize you just don't realize how actually in that dynamic where one person's believing that it's equal, actually on the flip side and reflection,
Mhm.
you realize actually it was about 60-40
Yeah.
or 30-70.
And I've realized that in
So
some of my friendships as well. But so, guys, it's important to note for the podcast that, boundaries can be healthy or unhealthy. So, I would expect toxic people, possibly narcissists, for their boundaries to be quite unhealthy. People with trust issues, quite insecure. But just going back to boundaries, a point that I forgot to kind of emphasize is that boundaries can also be emotional, physical, and in 2023, digital. So when we're talking about an emotional boundary, it might be just what you set out so that you can have space away from your friends or your partner. Like, on the weekends, I like to spend time to myself or things like that. And with physical stuff, maybe in relationships, right at the beginning, you might be, okay to maybe touch and hold hands, but, no sex. But those boundaries can change as the relationship changes as well. But in 2023, I think it's important digital boundaries. So, do you choose to follow each other? Do you share your relationship status? Are you allowed to share photos of your partner? These are all examples of boundaries that maybe people don't necessarily think about and possibly they should. So just to go back to that. But while I've got you guys on here, I really want all of your resources. So I'll ask you first, Marissa, and then Michelle, if you would like to answer the same question. But what were your boundaries like growing up?
um I don't know, having a Caribbean background, I don't know if it's the same for some listeners or, just anybody with anybody's parents were, I wouldn't say my parents were overly strict, you know. It was a children should be seen and not heard.
Mhm.
Like a lot of the time, if we went to family member's house or whatever, it's to make sure that, his shoes off at the door. Um, you come in, you go and say hello to your elders before you think about doing anything else. Don't think about, going out to play with a cousin or something like that. That's ridiculous. Make sure you go and, you show that level of respect. You go and you say hello, to your elders, and,
Manners.
let your face be seen, those sorts of things. In our household, um, I would say, you know, um, m- anybody who knows me knows that once you get to know me, I can be a little bit mouthy, like I'm not all quiet, but I always like to push I always like to push certain boundaries as much as I can. Um, and it's realizing and understanding, especially growing up with my siblings, how far I could push those, and with my parents as well. So knowing actually you've gone too far,
Yeah.
and if they had to tell me I've gone too far, then boy, that's a different story. But knowing when you've gone too far, and when you're little, you don't catch yourself. But as you get older and you grow up, these are things that you can identify for yourself. These are things that you learn about with yourself. Um, yeah, I think that, that's what is do. And I knew my place when I was growing up in my household. I knew, you know, as I said, one of the youngest of four, and it was mainly top down, but there was lots of love. But within that, I knew my place. I
Yeah.
knew my place with my brothers and my sisters, and I knew my place with my parents as well. And again, when we went out in wider society, one of the things I remember my mum saying when we when we were growing up, before we left the house, is don't embarrass me in public.
Yeah.
Like it was a no. It was unacceptable. It was, don't embarrass me in public. So whether, sometimes kids today, they throw tantrums or whatever, and that would be an embarrassment,
That could
you
not,
know.
that wouldn't have
Or
went down in the 80s. And I think all three of us.
no, right? And even like when I got older and, I went to school and I was taking myself off to secondary school and stuff like that. I mean, we grew up in a time, I know this might sound a little bit outdated to some much younger viewers, but
Mhm.
there was, my parents always said, be mindful about what you do out there because you don't know who knows you that knows me. And you think about it and you think, huh? Well, like, what are we talking about? Yeah, I'm not with you. I can do whatever I want. Actually, before you get home, the story's already there and then you're in trouble. So, you know, those things.
And this is pre-2023, so that trouble and the boundaries would usually require some licking of some skin.
Right. Exactly. And, this was before the digital age. So,
Mhm.
you're thinking this is not a text message or this is not a mobile phone call to your parents. This might be you saw someone who's going to see someone who will know your parents, who can go deliver that message. Or if it was, dire, phone box, 10p, if they could get you or whatever. But yeah,
These adults were just out here dry snitching on all of us. They were just,
It was
I'm not that
never.
adult now. If I see something, I'll just turn a blind eye.
But
Sorry.
see, you got a little pre-warning. There was a little warning to go home. We got the beats on the street. I'm thinking,
What?
you get the beats. You go home now and tell your mum why that person, auntie from church, beat you. Explain why she beat you. You're not going to do that because you were doing something you shouldn't have done. And if you tell mum now, you're going to get the double beat. So you better just be quiet. So yeah, we knew our boundaries and we didn't even have to get told. I say to my kids now, you are so lucky that I'm your mum. They go into the shop and they'll be picking up sweets. Can I have this? When I was little, do you think I could look in that direction? I couldn't even look over there and I'm picking up, can I have this? No, you can't. And I still I remind them because I come from that background. So they don't get this, they get soft, but they still get the old school. And I remind them when I was little, we couldn't do all of that. So you don't need to behave yourself. My kids, they don't throw tantrums, but they'll be running up and down. And I'm like, no, what are you doing? Like, you come in like some bad breed. You think I could have ever done that in my time? I get so mad with them. Like, what are you doing? You sort of, no way. Yeah, there was definitely boundaries growing up in an African household. We knew it. No one can't come in the house. You better make sure you're home when my mum gets home from work because she does a later shift. So get home, make sure the house is tidy, and then she's going to start dinner. Yeah, we knew what we were supposed to do. And like Marissa said, you knew what your place was. Even though as an adult, the trauma as a child of having to go in and say hello to everybody in the house, I still do that as an adult. I'll go in and open doors. Like, is anyone there? Hello. You know, like just to make sure I've said hello to everybody, because I was brought up like, don't you dare walk in someone's house and
Yeah.
not see. And I have like my nieces and nephews, friends now, they're like 17, 18, like, talk to your friend. Your friend just came up to me and asked me for something and didn't even say hello. I am so and so. Like, we don't do that around here. You need to come and introduce yourself and then you could talk to me again afterwards. Because yeah, you're in a new generation, but that doesn't mean we should forget the manners and the respect, because it didn't do us too bad. I feel like, you
But
know,
that's a,
yeah, it was hard for us, but look what it made us.
but
We
you
got mad.
said it, and I think
Exactly.
that's key. Anyone listening that's born, pre 1990, that you might know boundaries as manners, because that was the first boundaries that you had in a Black British household. Whether you're from the Caribbean or Africa, you had manners. Manners was something that was free, and it was expected. And in terms of growing up and boundaries and attachment, Marissa, I look at you as quite a secure individual. Now, secure people, so going back to the attachment podcast, that the young Orville, they tend to have better boundaries because, they don't have all these conditions of worth that we spoke about in authentic self. They've been shown the right amount of love and support, and they've had the right boundaries set for them. So, the insecure, more type of people, they tend to have trouble with boundaries. And it also dependent on the role in the family. So, Michelle, you're one of the oldest, I know, and Marissa's one of the youngest. So depending on your role in the family, your boundaries may have looked very different, because me, myself, I'm the oldest. So a lot more was expected of me than, I would say, my little sisters, who are hell raisers. Just to tell you, I think I got all the boundaries and they got none. But it just makes you think about, where this setting of boundaries and where you learn your boundaries. Because Marissa, you mentioned that it's quite unconscious. And Michelle, you said you don't really think about it. And you probably don't really think about it because you've had that strong upbringing of always having boundaries. So you walk in your boundaried spirit without having to go around telling people, these are my boundaries. And I know that, the both of you have no issues in your different ways in leaving people if they don't respect those boundaries. So just going on to that, now you guys had a bit more time to think about boundaries. How would you say you set boundaries in your friendships, family, and your personal relationships? Because I'm guessing the boundaries will look a bit different. So, Michelle, do you want to pick
I
up on
think
that
with
one?
friendships, it's probably learn over time. When you spend enough time with people, you'll know what is tolerable to that person, and that you'll let them know what is tolerable to you. And I think it comes through conversation as well. If you're talking about, something happened to another person and you say, I would never, I could never have a friend like that, whatever, they would know, I think by then, by that conversation as well, that is a boundary that you have. And in relationships, like I said, I think at the beginning, we all had the usual conversation, if you cheat, that kind of thing, then I would leave. I think a lot of people don't take that whole cheating one seriously because they do it. So they don't take it seriously because you say I want to leave and then they still do it. So for me, I don't know if it's the star sign thing or what it is, but my detachment game is on 100. I will leave you. You will never hear from me again. I swear to you. I might see you every day and inside I'm burning for you, but you're on my face, will not tell you anything. So for me, I keep my boundaries there and I don't let people take liberties with me because I can be nice, but I'm not a dickhead is what I need you to know. So at the end of the day, these are my boundaries. And if you decide to, disrespect my boundaries, then I've told you what it was and this is what it is now. So yeah, I don't play around with it. And I think you have to be like that. And that's happened over time. That didn't come. I wasn't like this as a 20 something. I was probably a lot more lenient. And even now, when I think back at the stories that you get told, excuses from guys, I think to myself, are you an idiot? Like, listen to this story that he was selling to you. Like, you really went along with that story. But at the time, the boundaries weren't there. So I allowed that to happen. And yeah, it's just learning over the years that, yeah, I need to put things in place and let people know that if you do this and that, then yeah, it's not going to happen to me. So yeah.
Marissa?
I think in terms of friendship, again, I'm a bit with Michelle. It comes over time. And I've had, well, you're my oldest friend, 100%. And the good thing about our relationship, I think, in a very much so an unspoken level, we have been in and out of each other's lives. I mean, we haven't been batty and bench for 30 years. But what's good is that we've always had an honest relationship and we've always felt that we can be honest with the other person and not take And I think a lot of the time in friendships, especially for me, what I've learned is I only, it's not always easy, but now as I'm older, I feel like I only want to have people in my life that I can be honest with,
Yeah.
that I
Yeah.
can be truthful with, that I can be 100% of myself with, and don't feel I have to hold back in something because I think I'm going to offend you, or I think I'm going to hurt your feelings, or I think if I say something that you're hurt by all means, I want you to tell me. But I think what I'd want you to understand is it's coming from a good place.
Yeah.
And whether it's I don't understand the situation as clear as I thought I understood the situation, so therefore, maybe I misspoke or I spoke out of turn or whatever the case may be. If I say something to somebody that I consider a really good friend, it's never malicious.
Yeah.
It's never because I want to hurt that person. It's always out of a place of love and concern. And like I said, you can leave or you can take it, and you can feel free, in fact, to tell me about it. And I should be grown up enough now, to take
Mhm.
that feedback on board
Yeah.
and, understand it. There's somebody that I work with, and although we work together, we have grown very close. We've got a very good friendship, but especially in the office, when you hear us talk, there's a lady that we work with, and she just really treats, are you two even friends? Like the way you two talk to each other, like are you two even friends? Because sometimes I will just say something to her and somebody else might think, whoa, that was a bit harsh. But actually she
It's
can
the
take it.
boundaries that use that shaft.
She can,
That's the
yeah, that's shaft. She can take that from me, right? She understands, she knows. And I can do the same for her.
hey shaft.
I if whatever it is she wants to give me, yeah, I can take it.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
you
and
guys do banter. I've seen them at it. And that's another thing that, you know, we have to take into consideration when we're bantering, because
yes,
Yeah, there's
that's something
bound
that people don't bring into it with
mhm,
boundaries. Because, someone doesn't get your banter and they're not that type of person, it can be quite offensive.
right.
So, you know, I think you said some good things, but I think for the interest of the podcast, just before we move on to the second half of the podcast, where we'll get a bit more interesting. So this one's only got about another 5 minutes or so to go, but the second half of the podcast gets a bit more juicy. But when I'm dealing with my clients, and people always ask me, like, Lee, how do you set boundaries? How do you start? And because I like letters, come on, it's an alphabet podcast, I've come up with the 4 C's. So I think the first thing when you're setting boundaries is to be clear. So we've already hit on it. If you don't know what your boundaries are, how is somebody else supposed to know what your boundaries are? So you have to be very clear what your deal breakers are, okay? What you're comfortable with. And if that changes over time, it changes over time. The second most important thing, and they're all as important as each other, but this is the second thing, communication. Michelle mentioned that she has these boundaries and they're very good boundaries all in her head, but without communicating those boundaries, are we giving people a fair opportunity to respect them? And if we're not communicating, why are we not communicating? What are our fears around communication? Is it that we fear being vulnerable, maybe? So the next one is to be consistent. So you don't want to keep changing your boundaries every day. So they will change over time. However, don't keep changing them every day, because then no one's going to take them seriously. But the one for me that I think most people struggle with, providing that they are able to set boundaries, is the consequences. There has to be some consequences for breaking a boundary. And if there are no consequences, then why shouldn't I break your boundaries? What's the reason not to? You're going to stay. So, it's very important that we're setting boundaries in all our relationships. And I think for the most part, people set boundaries with their partners. Maybe they even do it with their friends, but with family, are we setting boundaries? So we've got a few minutes on this podcast. Which one of you wants to pick that one up? Do you think we set enough boundaries with our family?
I think some
I
people
don't.
don't.
I don't.
I
Boundaries.
personally, but I've spoken to people who will be that, oh, I've got to spend time with my family. And I'm like, why are you going? You're an adult. What if they make you feel like that before you've even got there? You've got all this dread, all this anxiety. Why are you even putting yourself through that? You can't pick your family. It is what it is. But that doesn't mean you got to be around them. I can love you from a distance. Okay, maybe we can do a WhatsApp every so often, a little check in. Are you still alive? All right, cool. See you in 6 months. Otherwise, I don't need to be. If you make me feel some kind of way, I'm at the age where the aunties who, like my mum's friends back in the day, I don't call you auntie anymore, but I don't have respect for you. If I think you're rude and I don't think you're a nice person, I drop out the auntie now. So that's where my boundaries are as well. Because, okay, you're an adult and you're senior to me, so I should call you auntie. But I can see your behavior. I'm not a 9-year-old anymore. Like, I'm a big 40-something-year-old woman. I can see what you're doing. So my boundaries now is that I don't deal with you on that level. You're my mum's friend if my mum wants to continue being your friend. But for me, I've got a boundary of you, and it's not to, get any further than hi at my mum's door, and that's about it. So yeah,
That is what it is. This is the reason why she's my friend. Authentic self, she's speaking her mind, living in her truth. Marissa, what do you think about boundaries with family? Just quickly before we wrap this podcast up.
I think I think close family, like my immediate family unit, I'm probably not very good at setting boundaries with them. In terms of nieces and nephews, yes, little ones, very good at setting boundaries with those. As my older ones, nieces and nephews have got bigger, the level of respect still needs to remain. And as they've gotten older, I will still pull them up if I think they're out of order or they've said something out of turn, like to their mum or to their dad or whatever. Yeah, don't forget yourself. Yeah, remember who they are. That's
I'm
your
that one
parent, but
somebody,
also yeah, and I remember that that's my brother or that's my sister. So
It's
just because they're your dad or they're your mum, yeah, believe
my
me,
sister
they were my
said-
brother or sister first,
Yeah.
right? So therefore, you will never disrespect them in front of me and think you can get away with it.
And I've seen this.
Just because
Seen this.
your relationship might be different as a mother and a daughter or a mother and a son, your relationship is what it is. But that's still my sister, that's still my brother. As much as I love you, I love them. But keep the respect,
Yeah.
keep the respect. I think in terms of my siblings, yeah, I would say I'm working on it. That's a work in progress. It could be better. But I'm getting older, so I feel that can grow with me.
That can grow with
Definitely.
you. No, I do understand. So, guys, I hope you guys are fully warmed up. That's just the first half of the podcast. On the second half of the podcast, we'll be looking at what stops people from setting boundaries and putting some real life scenarios to the test with these two beautiful ladies. So, thanks for listening to the first part of Boundaries, and catch us on the second episode coming right back up.